yo, it's your boy Agent Albatross here again with the Cypher Unlimited crew. We got the usual suspects. We got Spigs or Anthony. We got Dean or Alpha Dean. And Dean, why are we here today?
Well, today we get to, talk to the magnificent, the illustrious, the legendary Jeff Dee. This man changed many lives way back in the 80s. He has a couple of companies that he runs right now, and he'll tell us all about that. But the big thing on the docket, as far as I'm concerned, was Villains and Vigilantes, now in its third iteration, Mighty Protectors or Villains and Vigilantes 3.0. But there's other games that Jeff is all about. And Jeff's also an artist and very, very prominent in a lot of things. So, Jeff, how's it going? Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I go back till the olden days in the hobby, and yes, I've been an artist and a game designer pretty much since the beginning, mid '70s.
First off, Jeff, we're happy to have you here. Welcome to the CU.
Thanks.
I know me and Dean were geeking earlier about actually having you on the show today.
Yep, so they definitely were.
So this
relax.
This is a really cool experience, but you have a long history as an artist and a game designer. Can you tell our viewers that may not know, how did you actually break into the industry?
I had the good fortune of growing up in a little town about a half-hour drive south of Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, just over the border in Illinois. And my eldest brother discovered D&D when he was in his high school gaming club, and he introduced me to it. And then, that was what D&D was 74, I think. So like within a year of that, we were aware and playing and driving up maybe once a month or so to the Dungeon Hobby Shop in Lake Geneva. Met all those guys, when they were still just getting started. My first published artwork ever was in Dragon Magazine #6, because I used to bring my little drawings up there and like show Tim Kask behind the desk, and he'd sell you games and then go up to the office and work on the magazines and the next upcoming products and stuff. So I got connected with those guys then, and then headed off to art school at the Joe Kubert School in New Jersey, which was a 3-year course. I left after a year and a half because I got a job offer at TSR. So then I was working there full time when I was about 19, I guess.
Awesome. I mean, come on, you could tell us the truth.
Which is why I still don't look like that much of an old guy.
You could tell us the truth. Did you have any idea that TSR was going to blow up like it did?
I mean, it was already national news when I got to art school, and that was about the time that James Dallas Egbert thing happened, and everybody was talking about the kid that disappeared, playing Dungeons and Dragons, and I was one of the few people at the art school that knew anything about the hobby, so like that was a big thing. I don't think anybody knew how much gaming was going to wind up influencing movies and novels and TV shows and create entire genres of computer games and things back at the time. I mean, computer games weren't even really much of a thing yet, except in arcades. So no, I mean, nobody knew. It was, I think it felt back in those days, felt a lot more like, hey, just leave us alone. We're just making a little game, and there's all this all these lies circulating in the media about what it's all about and stuff. And we're just having fun making games. Leave us alone.
But that sort of leads us into our next question. Is we're mentioning TSR. So you were around for the early years of TSR. So what was that experience like, creating artwork for such an iconic franchise? And did it influence your design work later on in your career?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So I wasn't I wasn't one of the very first people at the company, right? But in the days when they were just getting started, that was me, a little junior high kid showing up at their store and waving pictures at them. But I guess I was in the second wave. So in my day, there was Errol Otis and Dave LaForce, and Dave Sutherland was the art director. I forget what the first part of your question was now. I remember that it goes into how did that influence my game design.
What was the experience like producing artwork for such an iconic franchise?
Oh, right. So I can tell you what the process was like. We would get copies of the blank pages for, say, modules, right, where all the text had been laid out and there were just spaces left for pictures. And almost never that I can recall were told what to draw there specifically, right? It was like, read this page, find something on it that would look interesting in a picture. If there's nothing on that page, look at the facing page to see if there's anything interesting over there. And if there isn't, then do your best, which is why occasionally you get drawings of empty rooms and things. It was so it was very loose and unstructured, and a lot of camaraderie amongst the artists, showing each other our stuff, and wrangling over who got to draw what. Particularly with deities and demigods. There was me and Errol Otis both wanted to do the Cthulhu section, and I think Sutherland made the right choice in putting Errol there. Yeah, that one. I really wanted to do it, but I got to do the Elric section, and then both of those got removed from the book in later editions. So, but it was all very jovial, and there's a lot of camaraderie, a lot of gaming together, of course, off hours and stuff. Pretty much, I think, what you'd expect. It wasn't. What it was not yet was particularly corporate, at least not when I started.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Being small, almost family-like, I'm guessing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was. See, at that time, the offices, the creative offices, were upstairs from the new location of the Dungeon Hobby Shop, which was in this corner shop right in downtown Lake Geneva. And then the upper floors, 2 or 3 floors above that, were where all the writers and artists were at. And then the business end of the company, the marketing and the printing and the shipping and all that stuff was in their great big new warehouse building outside of town. So I guess things were probably a lot more corporate over there, but we didn't have to, other than punching a time clock. It was pretty relaxed.
That's awesome.
So, yeah, I mean, I'm really geeking out. It's really bad. I didn't think, I'm normally not like this, but
he never shuts up, and now he's like quiet as a mouse.
It's true.
I mean, this is like really one of the best days, because I didn't realize just how much, we were sitting here listening and all this time that went by. But I've been playing, V&V, and the influence, and how when I first saw the book, when I first saw the advertisement for it, in the back of a Dragon magazine, and I lost it. And I'm like, oh, superheroes, because that was always my favorite thing. So, speaking of which, Villains and Vigilantes, I believe it was the first, and if not one of the first, superhero RPGs to ever hit the market. With that being said, how do you think, the genre has changed since your early days? And
the superhero genre or gaming?
The actual superhero genre and superhero gaming genre itself. How do you think those changes are? But what was your inspiration to actually start off with the game?
Oh man, so Jack Herman is the co-creator of Villains and Vigilantes, and we were best friends in high school. Met when we were both, for one, period per day, we worked in the high school library, putting books back up on the shelves and stuff. And that's where we met. And we would just go back in the stacks and goof off and stuff. And, talk about the latest episodes of TV shows, or show each other comics and stuff. Talk about Monty Python and all whatever else was amusing us at the time. And Jack has always been. This is not relevant to the story, but Jack has always been more of a DC guy, and I've always been more of a Marvel guy. And I think that turned out to be a good combination for the game, right? Because we sort of hopefully hit something that's kind of a balance between those two things. He had a friend, I can't remember the guy's name, Tracy something, I believe, who had illustrations in the original Dungeons and Dragons books. But Jack wasn't really a gamer yet, and I kind of introduced him to the hobby, and so we were, talking about D&D and talking about TV and talking about comics and talking about everything, and one day for some reason we got into a discussion of whether Spider-Man or the Human Torch would win in a fight, and decided to game it out. So. We took the only game that I had at the time, because my brother had gone off to college and taken the entire gaming collection with him, except for Empire of the Petal Throne, which was from TSR Hobbies, 1975, I believe. First RPG that ever came with a setting built in. And it's awesome, and one of I guess we'll get into that later. But it's a science fantasy game, but we just took the mechanics for rolling to hit and hit points and stuff and ripped those out and wrote up some rules for the powers for Spider-Man and for the Human Torch, and then we have them have a fight. And I don't remember who won, and it doesn't matter, but we kind of at the end looked at each other and thought, wow, a superhero role-playing game? Are people allowed to do this? And so we wrote up some rules, and we went to the Gen Con show in Lake Geneva that was at the Playboy Mansion. It was, I guess, the last one before it left Lake Geneva or something. And we were shopping around our manuscript. We're a couple of high school kids, right? We looked around the dealer room and saw all the things that were coming out, and settled on approaching Fantasy Games Unlimited because they had games like Bunnies and Burrows.
Yeah.
You might have heard of. We're going, yeah. Any company that's going to publish a role-playing game about being bunnies will publish anything. So we were right, and that's not a slight against FGU. They introduced a lot of great games to the hobby. So we approached them, and they expressed interest, and then we went back, and we wrote, and we submitted a manuscript, and then I went off to art school, and FGU was on Long Island, and I was in New Jersey, which was pretty close. So occasionally I would go up there and visit them, and that's how the first edition of Villains Vigilantes came out. Then I had my opportunity to go work for TSR. So when I was at the TSR art department, first edition Villains Vigilantes was a thing. And just a stupid inside story, when TSR first approached Marvel about what eventually became TSR's Marvel Superheroes game, I was working there, and TSR didn't have a design yet, and Jack and I seriously considered taking what became revised Villains and Vigilantes and pitching it to TSR to be the Marvel Superhero game. And I don't remember exactly why that didn't happen. I think we felt that was kind of unfair to FGU, and And I wasn't in the design department, so I didn't really have the connections, but it didn't happen, but it was talked about. And so when I left TSR, I wound up getting a job working as the art department at FGU for a year or so. So
this is
is that too much information yet?
No, this is awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, I really to kind of piggyback on it, just out of curiosity. You were saying how oh, go ahead, Anthony. My thought just ran away from me.
I was going to ask something that's not related to my question, but when I was doing my research, I read somewhere. I want to know if this is true or not because I really like this game as well. But you was part of the initial brainstorm for the Toon RPG. Is there any truth to that fact?
That's not that's overstating it.
I was read it like 3 shows.
I was at a party at a Gen Con. This is some years later. At a party at a Gen Con, and the party kind of spilled out onto a balcony, and there were people sitting there, smoking and drinking and stuff, and leaning on the railing, and the discussion had turned to, oh, all of the genres have been done now, right? We've got role-playing games about everything. And I said, no, we don't. For example, there's no, Bugs Bunny's Saturday morning cartoon kind of role-playing game. And Greg Kostikian, who was there, took the idea and ran with it and credited me on the title page when it came out.
What year was that, Jeff?
I don't know. It would be whatever Gen Con was a year or two before Toon came out.
The reason why I say that because it's funny. People to this day are still saying that same statement. Everything's been done, and then like every few years, someone comes out with something entirely new.
Yeah, I don't think. I mean, we're finding that there are lots. There's still lots of territory that can be explored in terms of mechanics in games, and in terms of subgenres, right? So now there's I played in a guy's game last year. Oh gosh, I'm embarrassed because I don't remember the name of it, but it was fun. It was a very old school D&D based, like golden age superheroes RPG for like the super early superhero comics. So we're getting like niche games like that, and every once in a while somebody will come up with something completely new. So yeah, I think we'll be going for a long time.
I mean, that's a perfect lead into my question is, you have designed and created many different games, from Villages and Vigilantes, messing with the supers genre, to Stone Punk with Cave Masters, which I'm going to get right after this. Do you have a favorite genre, and what sort of games are you playing actively now?
Oh, okay. So, what I want to play from moment to moment changes, but I think superheroes will always be my favorite genre, just because it's completely everything, right? I mean, you need a set of superhero rules has to be able to cover everything that you might have covered in games on all the different subgenres, right? You have to have spaceships because superheroes go into space in spaceships, and you need to have like investigative stuff, and you need to have sorcery, and you need to have fisticuffs, and all everything you could possibly imagine needing rules for like an adventure-oriented RPG. You need them for a superheroes game. So as a designer, that's the genre that I always kind of test everything I come up with against, right? I mean, if I needed to run superheroes with this, would I be able to modify it to do it? And but then what I want to play from moment to moment changes, because you get tired of doing that sort of kind of thing. You asked what games I'm playing right now. At my home, we have a Thursday night group and a Friday night group. And each of those nights has 2 GMs who alternate. So that's 4 campaigns going on at a time. And then roughly every other Saturday, Brian Adams, who wrote our upcoming World War II source book for Mighty Protectors, runs various things. So just quickly running down the list, on Fridays, we have one guy running a kind of interestingly interdimensional Mighty Protectors campaign. Like, his premise is that there's like an evil dimension with bad versions of the superheroes and good versions of the supervillains, and they're trying to invade our dimension. It's like kind of like the big story arc in the background. Where I am playing Krikun, who is a Russian kid, was the sidekick of a Russian superhero called the Knight, who was killed by Vladimir Putin's regime, and fled. He's sort of like a combination Robin / Spider-Man, but with a sonic scream.
Nice.
That's pretty neat.
The other GM is my partner Amanda in UNIgames. She is running Bethorm, which is our TechML game, which we're going to have to get into in more detail. That's related to the Empire of the Petal Throne thing that I mentioned earlier. And she is actually running 2 campaigns in that. One is a group of characters who are followers of the gods of stability, and the other is a group of characters following the gods of change. And she's got some kind of big plan for those storylines to intersect at some point. So that's really interesting. On Fridays, I am running a Mighty Protectors campaign. My characters, my player characters, are low-powered superheroes in Austin, Texas. They were put together by a NPC called the Golden Guru, who is he's this Pakistani guy who's a martial artist, and in his day job, he is a motivational speaker. And his gimmick as a motivational speaker is that people should take on fanciful names and wear thematic costumes, not to hide who they are, but to show the world who they really are. Unfortunately, the Golden Guru he's been driven from the U.S. because President Trump is cracking down on superhero licensing of people who are not citizens. So that's the thing going on there. And the other campaign on Fridays, it was Manda again running the Cave Master rules, but doing an 1850s science fiction, not steampunk, she insists, science fiction campaign that was sort of loosely had elements of Stargate going on.
Awesome.
But I believe that is wrapping up, and I don't know what she's going to run next. And then Brian Adams on Saturdays, every other Saturday, runs currently a campaign using the Mighty Protectors rules, but very low-powered characters, and we are set in the late 20s, early 30s. It's a pulp era thing, and we've been tooling all around the South Pacific, like going to islands and raiding temples and fighting Nazis and things. So that's all the gaming I'm involved in right now on a regular basis. It's a lot.
Yeah, that all sounds awesome, though. Yeah, that all sounds like super fun games to be a part of.
Right. And honestly, Jeff, I know you're like deluged with games, but if you can, just like fit us in and come do a one shot.
You guys do live play sessions, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we do.
Let's set that up. I'll run some for you.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
That would be awesome.
If anybody's interested, anybody here used to play City of Heroes?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Dean was addicted to City of Heroes.
I ran a Mighty Protectors campaign set in Paragon City, and we streamed those videos to the Monkey House Games YouTube channel if you want to.
Yeah, I followed it. It was awesome.
Okay.
Oh, that's
All right.
cool.
We'll add that link to those videos on our
Okay, cool.
description box.
Just if people want to see that's the Friday group.
But
We have all kinds of awesome industry people in our games. I should mention this. For a while, we had Dennis Sustair, who's the guy who invented the Druid class for D&D, and also went on to write Bunnies and Burrows. He's retired and living in the area. He is for the moment retired from active gaming as well, because he's been around for a long time. But we've also got Dennis Loubet, not Bouvet, different artist, Dennis Loubet, who did a lot of stuff for Steve Jackson games back in the day, like the cover of Man to Man, which was the thing that led into GURPS for Steve Jackson games. That was his painting, and he's done a lot of illustration work and things, and also painted all the covers of the Ultima computer games.
Yeah.
Or Origin.
Yeah, I definitely remember Ultima.
And that's where I met Dennis. I wound up in the computer games industry as an artist for Origin Systems here in Austin, Texas, which is where I'm at now. So, and also Diesel, guy who used to sign his illustrations DSL in the D&D stuff back when I was there, Dave LaForce. I was at a convention in San Antonio, and all of a sudden Diesel was there standing in front of me saying, "Hey man, how you doing?" He had moved to Austin also, and we've been gaming together now down here for years. So
that's
still
awesome.
hanging out with old time TSR guys. So I don't think I'm missing anyone.
That kind of leads into our next question. Talking about game designers and whatever have you, people from the industry. So, do you have any advice for our listeners who might be budding game designers or artists and are looking to break into the industry themselves?
No, I've got absolutely nothing useless. I grew up a half-hour drive south of Lake Geneva back when D&D was just starting to be a thing, right? Do that, time travel.
It'd be at the perfect place at the perfect time.
Who could kind of draw could wander into their offices and get their attention.
Oh boy,
that's how I broke in.
That's gonna be the
completely honest with you.
So, man!
I want to get into
it's utterly unfair to everybody else on the planet. I know that I'm only here by sheer dumb luck. Right?
I think I kind of know a little bit about that.
Next time somebody asks me a question like that, I'm gonna say, "Yo, Jeff Dee said get a time machine." I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, like we have no advice other than to get a time machine and be in the right place at the right time. Force it.
I have to say that it's the best, but you know what? We asked that question, and that is the best answer.
Oh man!
We're gonna put that up on the list of the best answers.
Obviously, these days anybody can, get the software and do desktop publishing and put your own stuff up on the internet. You'll have to learn how drive-through works, and you'll have to learn how to use Acrobat and all that stuff, right? But it's doable by anyone. But I mean, the earlier, I think before we started, you were Anthony. You were asking me where to get my stuff online. It's all PDFs and print on demand online. We don't have store distribution. That's because we've talked to distributors and they say, really, the way the industry is right now, if you're not already one of the big three companies, you're just going to throw a bunch of money into boxes and boxes of books that will never sell through the standard retail distribution. And it's sad, but what are you going to do?
Well, I guess I can't ask the next question because you just answered it, which is awesome. Because the question was the difference between modern design, game design compared to the early years of the industry. And you kind of just covered all of that. So I'll ask you this.
I didn't say anything about design. I said stuff about,
getting it out
about
there.
manufacturing.
Let's hear about it.
I'll tell you what. Here's how I feel. Here's how I feel about the state of RPG design right now. Okay, I think we've got a hobby that has a built-in limitation, which is that you need somebody who can be a game master. This has always been an obstacle to people gaming. And I have seen two kind of opposite schools of thought emerge to try to address the problem. And one is things like Descent, that like board gamey version of dungeon crawling that does everything that a D&D game would do, but all the adventures are canned and you don't have a GM, right? Well, that's one thing you can do, is you can eliminate the GM role by automating everything and just turning it into a board game, which in my opinion makes it no longer the hobby that we all know and love. Then at the other extreme, there's the folks that want to go in the story gaming direction, where the responsibility for making up what happens is not in the game master's lap. It's sort of spread out among the players. In fact, the rules have more to do with deciding whose turn it is to say what happens and that kind of thing than with with mechanics simulating what's going on. And that's another extreme, and I don't recognize that as my hobby either. So what this might just me being an old grognard who's not able to change his ways, right? But I just look at the whole thing and say, no, there isn't a problem. The only problem is some people want to be able to make more money at this hobby than is available, because it's limited by the fact you need GMs. I wish people would focus their efforts on training up GMs and making things easier to GM than trying to recreate the hobby in order to solve that non-problem. Because what you don't get with either of those extremes, right? With board games, you do not have the possibility of surprise and the open-endedness, I should say, of a real role-playing game, because you don't have a guy in a real role-playing game. If you're in some dungeon somewhere, right, and you want to have a toothpick, you can say, are there wooden doors in this room? Why, I'll take my dagger and I'm just going to carve a little piece of wood out of that door and carry it around, pick my teeth or stab little things because I want one, right? The board game can't give you that. The board game gives you no opportunities for that to enter into the game. And so you lose that when you go without a GM to making things all mechanical. On the other end of the extreme, you can totally do stuff like that in a story game, but in a story game, you don't get you don't get to be isolated from information the way I think you need to be to have the sense of immersion that I'm used to and like from games, where we don't know what's in that next room and we don't get to decide. It's some other guy whose job it is, or it doesn't have to be a guy. There are some ways of replacing a GM's role that I think do work. There is a thing called Mythic. There's the Mythic Game Master emulator that I think more or less does the job. It's got its own limitations, but it'll get you a lot of the way there to a traditional kind of role-playing experience without any one person being the guy that gets to decide. That's my little rant about the hobby.
I'm absolutely in agreement. I think it'd be a sad day if GMs became obsolete.
Well, I don't think that that traditional role playing is going to go away. Think that going in those directions expands the traditional role playing hobby. I think it spins off other related hobbies, and there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with board games. I love playing board games, right? When we can't, but if we don't have a GM who's ready to run, we'll play a board game, and I'm totally cool with that. And I'm totally cool with story games To the extent that other people want to play them, I have no interest, but that is perfectly fine. I don't like Parcheesi either, right? But that doesn't make it a bad game. I just, I think the way to expand the hobby is to focus on making the actual hobby more accessible instead of changing it to make it more accessible.
You know, and I like Anthony said, he agreed. I agree as well. And I know myself, I'm kind of with you with that whole concept, because even as a player, you know, don't get me wrong, I love to play, but I know every time I'm a player, the game master or whatever the game I'm playing totally inspires me to come up with something else to put in a game myself as a game master. I love being able to, you know, build that immersion and build those moments, you know, and that's kind of like what I was talking about. And because remember I said I had a question when we were talking way back when.
Yeah,
it came back to me. And that's kind of what it is. It was back in the old days. I noticed every time you picked up a game, that game had its own built-in system. You know, it seemed like everybody designed a system. You know, if you wanted to play a superhero game, it had its own system. And if you played D&D, it was its own thing. And then Star Frontiers was its own thing. But all these games were made by the same company. Did you, you know, when did you think that idea kind of changed, when they just started building a system and started switching a genre in which the system worked in?
I don't think it has changed. I think that you can find some games that use like a house system where, you know, that publisher, like Chaosium was really big into this, right? They did their Super World game, and they I guess Pendragon is sort of its own thing, but Call of Cthulhu and Stormbringer / Elric are all kind of the Chaosium's basic role-playing system. You can find people doing that, and then you can also find people that are making brand new systems for things. And I don't think there's been a point where it really changed, and now one of those things is not done.
Yeah.
Do you?
Well, I don't think it's changed. No, what I've noticed is it just seems like there's a lot more of the concept of the universal system.
Well, I mean, the universal systems do go back a long, long time. When I was first starting, before Dragon Magazine, TSR published a thing called the Strategic Review. And I remember in the Strategic Review, there was like an article about doing World War II stuff with Dungeons and Dragons. You know, this is like before there really even were any other games. So I think it's perfectly reasonable to think, I've got a set of mechanics, can I apply this to other things? And it's also perfectly reasonable to say, I have a very specific kind of thing that I want to do, and it's an idea for a mechanic, and you know, what's the right game to marry that to make it work? And they're both, those are both fine. You know, I personally make a lot of different systems because I can't stop. It's not because I think that one way is that universal systems are bad. In fact, I think it's an open secret that all sufficiently flexible superhero game systems are, in fact, ultimately universal systems. Villains and Vigilantes was not so flexible, but Mighty Protectors is. So you may be seeing some more stuff from us using that system now that we can use it for more things. We have, in fact, run science fiction campaigns and other things with Mighty Protectors.
I mean, the superhero genre in its core is multiple settings to begin with.
Right. Yeah, well, yeah. It's because you need mechanics for everything. So when you want to do something that's not superheroes, it's like, well, has this got the mechanics for that? Yeah. Now, there is an argument to be made that custom-built systems for particular settings or genres can do a better job. And I'm okay with anybody that wants to go ahead and try to do that. But I also I think that's not as strong an argument as some folks might like. At Cave Master, right, is a caveman game, and it's got a very caveman mechanic. But we've used it. Amanda was using it for her 1850s science fiction campaign, right? So, and I've used it to run a Star Trek adventure. Actually, you just instead of hunters and gatherers and crafters and healers, you've got security and science and the different branches of Starfleet. So obviously specific genres may have specific needs that if you pick up an existing system, it may not have anything to address that need. Or with Mighty Protectors, you're going to need to put in some kind of rules variant to up the fatality level if you want to use it for much of anything besides superheroes, because the comic booky, it's not about people getting killed all the time thing is sort of baked into the mechanics. But we have that mechanic. We know what we'll use when we get around to making non-superhero games with that system.
Nice.
I mean, it'll lead into my question. I mean, you're a well-known game designer, artist, but you're a strong advocate for the atheists and the transhumanist movements. Now, I know you had a podcast.
I don't know how I got identified as a strong advocate for the transhumanist movement. I mentioned that I'm a transhumanist on several occasions, and it's true. And I think I have a lot of interest in that, but I'm not a spokesperson or anything. People message me on Facebook saying, "Will you come on my transhumanist channel and say some things?" I generally say, "No, I'm busy."
You did have a podcast, right? Or a YouTube
not
channel?
About transhumanism.
Oh,
the atheism thing. Yeah. Yes, I got involved with the atheist community of Austin years ago. I was working for at the time a little company called Illusion Machines, who made games you've probably never heard of, computer games. I had well, let me tell you my atheism story, my conversion story, right? I was playing Villains and Vigilantes, and I had rolled up a character I was living in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. I had moved there after leaving Fantasy Games Unlimited to pursue a comic book career. And Bill Willingham was living in Lake Geneva at the time and said, well, I'm working with Mike Gustovich, who's about to start penciling this book for Marvel called The New Mutants, and he needs background inkers, so come on down. So I went out there and I met this cool group of kids from their high school who were gaming, and that's where I met my wife. And this was going somewhere. Where am I going? Oh, atheism. So I was playing in a Villains and Vigilantes campaign that their group was running, and I had rolled up a massively powerful character who had like super flight and energy absorption toward his power blasts, and he was just immensely powerful. And that game master decided that I unbalanced his campaign, which indeed I did. And he decided to step in by having God show up in game.
Literal God.
To appear before my character and say, it's unfair that you have all these massive powers. I'm gonna take them down a peg so that so it's more balanced. And I said, I think I said something like, "You dick," because I knew I had been role-playing my guts out as a superhero doing only good things, right? And I thought it was incredibly irresponsible of some supreme being to reach down and interfere with somebody who was doing good because of some abstract standard of. By the way, Mighty Protectors is way more balanced because it really was a problem. I also played, to be fair, a guy whose only two powers, this is a different campaign. When I was working at FGU, I had a guy whose only two powers were life support, which is like a spacesuit, and water breathing. That was it. Right? Now, if you remember, in old-timey V&V, there was a form of water breathing where you didn't have to spend power for anything as long as you were in the water. So I asked the GM, can I fill my spacesuit with water? And he said, yeah. So I was this guy whose big power was he could be like doing all the things that required power without having to actually spend any. And so anyway, it's more Honey Protectors is way more balanced. So anyway, this got me thinking about power and responsibility and great power and what comes with that and stuff. And happens that my parents were Methodist ministers. They weren't when I was growing up as a kid. They met as missionaries in Cuba just before Castro, and I got married there, and then didn't go into working for a church. My mom became a teacher, and my dad became a businessman. But once my brothers and I were all out of the house, they went back to seminary and they got their religion licenses or whatever that is, and went into that. And this troubled me a little bit because I didn't really believe any of that stuff. But this incident in Villains and Vigilantes made me think about the Bible stories and the behavior of God and Jesus and things, and comparing that to Spider-Man, and with great power comes great responsibility. It just didn't make sense to me. And I was walking down the street one day, and I thought, well, okay, it's scary thinking about this stuff, but I was raised in the Methodist church where I was raised with the group of Methodists that my parents hung out with. I was raised to believe that God's this really, really nice guy, and he's for sure not going to be mad at me for using the brain which he supposedly gave me to think clearly about these issues. And once I had thrown off that yoke of fear, like 5 minutes later, I said, yeah, there's this thing called an atheist that I've heard of. I'm one of those, I think. So that's the entire story, and with its connection to the gaming and stuff.
I have two questions.
It's actually not what all the idiots that were attacking Dungeons and Dragons thought, right? They thought Dungeons and Dragons was going and like casting spells around a table by throwing dice, which is not at all true. But it is, in a sense. Gaming is a way of freeing your mind to look at things from different perspectives. So
I mean, it's going to lead to two questions. One was, since you told us that both your parents were in the ministry, did the satanic panic, that happened?
No. They're the Methodist Church, at least the one that my parents went to, is very liberal and kind of laughed at things that Baptists did. I do not claim that I had a unpleasant, particularly unpleasant religious upbringing. I would characterize it more as boring. I wasn't interested in things that were going on at the church. But so anyway.
And does your belief in atheism affect your game design in any way?
Belief in atheism?
I'm using a religious term to affect. I totally get you. I'm not a religious person, so this is even an awkward conversation for me.
It has not much. I have a fantasy setting that I have run in private games, where the premise, it's a D&D setting, and the premise is that there was this wizard who, if you recall, in the Deities and Demigods book, has stats for all the gods, right? And this wizard got powerful enough, Gorman was his name. This wizard got powerful enough that he could go out and find these gods, and if things went badly, he might go toe to toe with them and report how that went, right? And he visited all these different nations that had all these different religions with all their different creation stories, and he concluded that the gods are real because I went out and fought them and stuff, but the stories that they tell aren't true, that all this stuff about them having created the universe is just PR, and to try to get lesser beings to serve them on the basis of lies, And so Gorman kind of started a religion called Gormanism in my campaign, which has the teaching that no matter how powerful you are, you should not be a jerk. You should treat everybody with, whether less, more powerful than you or less powerful than you, with a modicum of decency and respect. And that's Gormanism. So he eventually died or ascended or something, and the kingdom that was left with his religion promptly misinterpreted it and went out on a series of crusades to liberate all the neighboring kingdoms of their gods, and became a sort of oppressive, bad atheism religion. It's not atheist because there are gods, right? It's as close as you can get in a fantasy game. And so my campaign took place in one of those neighboring countries that had this history. And so there were sort of the old gods there who were still hanging around and wanting to come back in, except that some of the old gods had converted to Gormanism and were really good guys. So that it affected my gaming. That was, on design, there's a little bit of sort of cosmology underlying the Villains and Vigilantes, Mighty Protectors multiverse. That not a lot of it got into the rule book, but this is Jack and I have discussed it, and we've published stuff about it in our forums at monkeyhousegames.com. Where we account for the existence of gods in our multiverse, right? So again, we can't say there aren't gods, because come on, Marvel and DC, right? Their gods are a thing. But how is it that there can be gods and yet they're not necessarily jerks, and but also you don't have to worship them? So we have like this whole made up justification for that that has to do with the multiverse. That's it. That's, I mean, it doesn't really change anything about game mechanics. It might have some slight effect on setting, but since a lot of games that I play in, there needs to be things called gods, I can't just get rid of them.
But that kind of segues pretty nicely into our next question for you. Where do you find your inspiration for your art and for your games? Like, where does that come from?
For art, I don't know. And for games, I don't know. It's
I think it's transhumanist.
It's my implant. I got the artist implant and the game design implant.
And it just sort of happened, and that was that.
I mean, where do you guys get when you have ideas? Where do you get them from? Same place. Right? Just think of things. Not every idea you have is you saw some other thing and that made you think of it. Sometimes, right? There are some examples you can point at. But a lot of times it's not. It's just, with Cave Master, though, that's one of the. Can we want to talk about Cave Master for a second?
Yes.
Yeah, go for it.
that is a game where there was a clear inspiration, and it's a little. I'm turning into one of those guys that talks a lot.
Yeah, right. Go for it. Yeah,
we might want to make 2 episodes out of it. So my dad never had any use for superheroes or Star Trek or Lord of the Rings or any of that genre stuff, right? He was a military history buff, but had no interest in any of the things that really got explored in the role-playing hobby. And I've always been sad about that, because I think he'd have been great at it. But even though I kind of credit him for getting me into the edge of the hobby, because he loved to play Avalon Hill, board games. Him and my older brothers, we did that as a family activity before there was D&D, and that led into it. So, but one episode of a different Mighty Protectors campaign that I was running, the heroes had been fighting some demons who were trying to invade our dimension and having wars against the demons to keep them at bay. And finally, I thought I got to end this plot line. So, let's do a thing where the head demon, Asmodan, appears before the players and says, "Fine, that's it. We need to resolve this one way or another. So I challenge you to a contest, and if we win the contest, then we get to invade your dimension, and if we lose the contest, then we go home. And to make it fair to you, I'm going to pick a game from your world that will fight against you in, and it's called baseball." I didn't My dad is also a huge baseball fan. In fact, my dad was a little league coach, and in my hometown of Cary, Illinois, there is a little league field named after him. It's called Dee Field.
Oh,
So, yeah, my dad was kind of cool. If only I could have gotten him interested in role play. So I came up with the extra rules that would be needed to do baseball kind of things with the Mighty Protector system, and we played one inning. The heroes were not allowed to use any of their powers that would be direct violations of rules. Like you couldn't energy blast the catcher or anything, right? But if you had super speed, you could totally super speed around the bases because you're fast. We played one inning, and the players loved it, and I even enjoyed it, and I don't like sports. And I thought after that, boy, if my dad would have totally understood that, right? Maybe not the weird superhero things, but he would have understood what we were doing. And I have some concerns about the hobby and how to expand it and keep it going forever. And I think the way that the big publishers are going, where it's, well, what we do is we make bigger and bigger glossy page full color rule books and write mechanics that require special dice and card decks and all these expansion books and things, right, to suck as much money as possible out of our dwindling fan base of aging grognards. At the time, that's what was going on. That didn't seem like a survival strategy to me. So I just had this thought, how do you make role-playing games more accessible? And in particular, I kind of have a knee-jerk reaction against unnecessary components. So I thought, well, what is the easiest set of components you could possibly get away with, right? What could you role play with that would cost you as little as possible? And I decided, well, it's rocks, right? And Cave Master all came from that. It was the set of role-playing rules that once you've learned it, you don't need the rule book anymore, because cavemen didn't have a rule book, right? The rules had to be simple enough that you could play this thing anywhere just by looking around, picking up some pebbles, maybe take a stick and scratch your character's skin outline in the dirt if you need to, right? And you can play an RPG. So that was the original impulse, and it was my partner Amanda who convinced me to go ahead and go with a caveman as the setting, because I was a little skeptical of that. I thought, come on, caveman, that's been tried before, and there's no big caveman games. But that was a case where the mechanics really were a great fit for that particular setting, so we went with it, and that seemed to be right.
I mean, when I was reading the description,
that was where my inspiration for Cave Master came from. Playing baseball and realizing my dad would have loved it.
You had me at Stone Punk when I was reading I was like, oh, this is right up my alley.
Oh boy.
My best bud from high school, Darren, when he watches this, he's probably gonna go pick it up too, because he's the ultimate in minimalist when it comes to RPG rules and stuff. And you just told him he could play a game and throw the rule book away. Right. And that being said, Jeff, what do we have to look forward to in the future? I mean,
I am right now between ideas for new RPGs. I'm pretty sure I still have at least one more in me. But I've churned over a few ideas, and I'll just tell you what they are and why I've dropped them. Um, the very first thing I ever tried to design was a Land of the Giants inspired RPG. Do you guys remember Land of the Giants? It's a
Absolutely.
Yes.
70s TV series about the spaceship lands on the planet of the giant people.
Yep.
Right? And you're a tiny guy, right? Brilliant. I put a lot of work into trying to make that concept work. And what finally convinced me to drop it is the juggling all the different scales of things just turned out to be constant tedium because you can't really play it life size because your gaming group would have to be wandering around the neighborhood with their little action figures, making them climb trees and things, which is just not practical. And so you want to play it on a tabletop where you're playing it on a tabletop with miniatures. Well, what if a full-size guy comes along? So what scale are you playing at so you can have a full-size guy? I settled on a scale where the player characters were 15 millimeter, right? Because at that scale, you could do like a house, the interior of a house map at the size of Land of the Giants with the 15 millimeter guys, and then have, I don't know, 6-inch tall figures or whatever it was for the humans. And it worked. But then you had to, okay, so what is the scale on the tabletop and what is that in to the perception of the characters that you are, and then how much is that in real life? And it was just too much. I gave it up. Maybe somebody else can take that idea and run with it, but I gave up. Then I had, and that was so that was the first idea I ever had as a fledgling game designer, and never took it anywhere, so didn't realize what was wrong with it until last year. So then I worked for a while on another idea that I've wanted to do, which is a science fiction game that is specifically about being a colonist on a new planet, right? And I thought, wow, I can sort of adopt the D&D model for this, where you're in your little town, right? And you go to the tavern. And so this would all be science fiction versions of these things, right?
Yes,
There's
yes.
the little colony, and then there's the place where you meet publicly with other colonists, to talk about what's going on and stuff. And great idea. The problem is that to make it work, to really get at what was supposed to be exciting about it, your planet map had to start blank, right? Which is okay. Like D&D games often started with a world map that's blank, at least from what the players could see, right? But this is science fiction, and you needed to like make your own creatures, and you needed to make your own world, and it turned out to be so much of a weight on the GM that I thought the only way this is going to work is if I give you a planet, and then it's going to have no replay value because the second time your colonists who first arrived on that world, you've seen it all before. So
I mean, that would obviously work for us because I don't know if you've seen our stuff, but all three of us are really big in improving GM. We all improv GMs, so we probably could have handled that.
You guys are welcome to any of these ideas and take them. I turned them through my brain recently and decided. So then the latest idea that I've been tinkering with that I'm gonna drop. Have you all seen Ray Harryhausen's Jason and the Argonauts?
Of course, absolutely. Yeah.
So when the camera moves to Olympus and the gods are all sitting around like a table, right? And they're looking down, and the table is the world. And there's these figures that are the adventurers and the monsters and the cities and all that stuff, right? And I thought, well, what about a role-playing game where you're not those adventurers or monsters or things down on the map? You are the gods sitting around the table, and the table is the world. And the role-playing is you being the gods. And so you're sort of role-playing around a board game where the board game is the world.
That's really interesting, actually. I dig that a lot.
So I thought that was a much more pervasive image than it really is. In fact, I can't find that imagery used almost anywhere else. So basing an entire premise on referencing an old movie from the 60s that very few people will have seen. That's one strike against it. Another strike against it is that the it's really not a game about you going around and doing things. It's about you having minions going around and doing things at your command. So it really is just a board game. And then that raises the question of who is your conflict against? Are you against each other? I don't like PvP in tabletop RPGs. I think when you're sitting around the table together and you tend to keep doing that for weeks and weeks and weeks in a campaign, you got to be on the same side, in my opinion. Otherwise, it breaks down. It's fine for a one-shot, but I don't want to design a one-shot RPG. So then the game master has to also be there, and then he has to be able to be the other gods. And what if they show up, right? What if the Egyptian gods want to attack Olympus? Well, then you're back to a traditional RPG and breaks my beautiful little concept of you're the gods sitting around the table. So I have abandoned that too. And I don't know what I want to do next. And I shouldn't be thinking about these things because I think Dean will be aware. Did you back the Mighty Protectors Kickstarter?
Yes,
Dean?
I did.
You did. I figured from what you were saying. We've still got a bunch of stuff to deliver, right? On that. So really, I shouldn't be working on these things. These other ideas. I need to be churning out the Mighty Protectors thing that people are waiting for.
Oh, don't worry. We'll wait patiently. The Mighty Protectors is good stuff.
I think that's part of your DNA. I don't think there's no escaping. You're gonna be thinking about games for the rest of your life.
I think that's how it is for most people in this hobby.
What's that?
I think that's how it is for most people in the hobby. It's just always in the back of their head something new that they want to try or something new they want to create or something like that.
Yeah, I have a bad problem. I have a really bad problem.
Before we go into our rapid fire questions, you have two companies, right? Monkey House Games and UNIgames, right? UNIgames, right? Why two companies?
So it's because first I'm only publishing because I didn't happen to be in a close-knit group of friends who already wanted to start a game company. So I had to start my own. And the big companies aren't interested in they're only interested in more of the stuff they're already doing. And I have my own ideas. So I had to start a company, and it's called UNIgames because it's UNI. It's UNI Games, and that's me and my wife Amanda, who also goes by Talshamir, and is an awesome artist and game designer and writer in her own right. So we started UNIgames because I couldn't stop designing things, and one of them got to the point where it was done enough that the next obvious step is to put it out there where other people could find it. And that happened just at the time when RPG Now, which got subsumed into DriveThru RPG, when that was just starting to be a thing. So UNIgames has still got like a very low publisher number. We might be in the double digits on DriveThru. So we did that for like a decade, and then Jack Herman and I found out that we could get the rights to Villains and Vigilantes back after decades of thinking it was gone forever and there's nothing we could do. And it did not make sense to fold that into UNIgames, where Jack would have to give up part of his influence over the game because there's already me and Amanda, right? And his wife wasn't interested. So because we kind of expanded the company. Instead, we just said, fine, we'll just start another company that will be me and Jack. So that's why it's just practical.
Makes sense.
Well, don't-
there's interesting crossover though, because before Villains and Vigilantes came back to us and thus to the world, I had done another superhero RPG called Living Legends. You guys familiar with Living Legends at all? Okay, awesome, Dean. That was what I did during that, many decades long interim where I thought I'd never get the rights to V&V back. But to be fair to Fantasy, did Scott Bazar from Fantasy Games Limited, he never claimed to own our characters and made a big point of that, which was fair and honest. So Living Legends is the characters from Villains and Vigilantes and the setting from Villains and Vigilantes, but a completely different system and under a different name. So when Jack and I started Monkey House Games, I thought my contribution, Jack, is going to be Living Legends, since it's in our universe, is going to move over to Monkey House Games because UNIgames have been publishing it. Right. So, there.
Nice.
So, real quick, Jeff, since you have these two publishing companies, are you looking for proteges or looking for submissions?
Looking for whose?
Proteges or submissions?
Oh man.
Or both.
I'll be honest with you. There's not a lot of money in this industry, and I don't believe in paying people just by exposure. So we do take outside submissions, but we don't pay a lot because we just can't. And I feel bad about that. So I don't make a big effort to go out seeking freelancers because I don't, if you want to do it just because you love it, fine. And I feel like I'm taking advantage of you. The other thing is that while Fantasy Games Unlimited did not claim to own any of our characters, neither do Jack and I did we ever claim to own any of the characters created by any of the people who wrote adventures for Villains and Vigilantes back in the day. It would not be, we don't have those rights, and we wouldn't pretend that we do. So you may have noticed that the Mighty Protectors Multiverse has sort of regrown, but only out of the smaller set of adventures that Jack and I made, because we don't own any other stuff. Bill Willingham keeps making noises about wanting to come on board, but he's hard to get hold of these days.
Well, Jeff,
Huh?
We'll talk after the video because there's
the point I wanted to say is not only can we not pay very much, but also we have to insist that we get ownership of the stuff that you submit to us, because we can't have this happen again where the greater part of our universe disappears
because you don't own it.
Because we were being all honorable back in the day when it was all about creators' rights and stuff, and Jack and I, wanting to actually do comics too, had to be on the side of creators' rights. So we are, and as a result, our universe got split in half.
Well, no, and again, we'll talk afterwards. But yeah, there's
what you want. If you want to, do you want to write or draw?
I write.
Okay, you need to contact Jack Herman.
Okay.
I can that up.
Okay. But
you have some questions for me?
Yeah. So now we're gonna move on into our rapid fire questions. Those were the the softball questions we asked. Now these are the where we dig deep into your soul.
The hard questions where I'm only allowed to give you a one-word answer.
Yes.
And possibly do justice. All right. Fine,
So are you ready for this, Jeff?
No, but go ahead.
Player or GM?
Both.
Good
That
answer.
works.
So pull punches or go for that TPK?
Pull punches. I don't believe in killing my players. So I'm explaining myself. I know I'm not supposed to, but
It's no
go
biggie.
No. You can definitely explain.
I don't believe it. If you kill everybody, the game's over. What's the point of that? It's much more interesting. It's much more interesting to get them all captured, right? Because then they still have to do stuff.
Online gaming or at the table?
Oh, God, both. I'm a huge No Man's Sky fan. You guys play No Man's Sky?
I've never.
I've heard of it.
Right after this, Jeff is running for his local congressman. He's a politician.
I'm telling you the truth, man. If you ask me role-playing games or board games, I'd say both. No, I'd say role-playing games. I like it.
It's me or you, Al.
You.
You.
Announce the difficulty number, or do you like to keep it secret?
If you're playing
Announce it.
Cypher system, okay.
Announce it. The mechanics are there to be a shorthand to help describe the world and give players a handle on what's going on and what their chances are. And I think there's no point in hiding that. Until I hide it until they have good reason to have that grasp of it, right? Like the first time you shoot at a bad guy, I don't tell you what your odds are. But when you see he's like super dodgy, then I start telling you what your chances are.
Makes sense. So salty or sweet snacks at the gaming table?
It's so hard.
This one,
Both at the same time.
this one usually gets everybody. As well.
So both at the same time would be like chocolate covered pretzels.
Yeah. Yes.
Raisinets in your popcorn.
Oh boy.
Wait, was that a question?
No.
There's an author out. Just throw a box of Raisinets in your popcorn. You'll be happy.
We actually, Banda cooks and often makes us a treat for the table.
That's nice.
So RP, combat, or a good mix?
Good mix. Oh, thank you for including my actual choice in there.
Dee just
Yeah,
wrote that
role playing explain you need to have the fights, and the fights are the thing you need to do to advance your plot and your goals.
Anthony?
Is that it?
No, there's a couple more.
PDFs or physical books?
Oh, physical books. Wow.
Definitely hard to agree on that one.
I could just answer.
All right. Pen and paper notes or digital?
I'm still pen and paper notes. I get why digital would be so handy, but I'm old-fashioned.
Same.
And with art too. My good friend Dennis Loubet, who's in our gaming group, and I've known him since my origin days. He's an artist who has moved entirely digital. So he does these paintings, and he makes beautiful artwork. And I go, dude, where's your original? Don't you know there are people in the world who want to buy that from you?
Oh boy.
All right, so it's true.
That's a good point.
Do you like pre-written adventures, or do you like to do original content?
Original content. I've never liked pre-written adventures. I'll run them occasionally if there's a real need to have a game and I don't have anything prepared, but I don't like it. And I don't much care for writing them either. Which one then has to do? I get the necessity, but to me that's that first step toward automating the game and to make game mastering easier by depriving the game master of as much freedom as they should have. So.
And that wraps up our rapid fire questions. Woo! You did it. You did it. You did it. And that kind of wraps up our little discussion here. Thank you so much for coming on, talking with us. It was definitely a great insight into all your works and creations. It was definitely awesome hearing all those stories and hearing about your works and your thought processes into them, and how you kind of lucked your way in there as your advice to getting into the industry. But no, it was an awesome talk. Hopefully all our viewers enjoyed it, and we'll definitely. Anthony will be sure to add all your links, to the description of our video below, so all our viewers can see all the stuff you've been talking about. And for all our viewers out there, what would be the best way to see your thought process or contact you via social media, Jeff? Do you have a Twitter, Facebook, stuff like that?
I got all those things. You can find me on Facebook. I've got a DeviantArt page. It's jeffd.deviantart.com, I believe, but you can search for it. Got a Patreon where the work that I'm doing shows up. I do a lot of like commission work right now, and so when I complete a piece for a client, if there, unless I have an objection, I put that up there for my patrons. And I've just announced that I want to do a webcomic. That's what I'd really like to do right now, and it seems like the obvious place to do that is through my Patreon. But I'm trying to whoop up sufficient numbers of patrons to make that viable. So yes, Patreon. And then, of course, monkeyhousegames.com and unigames.us are the two companies.
Of course, we're going to add all those links to this description down below of this video.
Yep.
And if you, all our viewers, if you can, please support Jeff because he's awesome. And if you didn't know, he was the president of the Transhumanist Society. No, I'm just
These how rumors get started.
I love how we have not even said what transhumanism is, which is fine.
No,
look it up.
We're going to leave it blank like that. It's actually more give our viewers some homework.
But yeah, thank you so much for being on. Thank you all, everyone out there for watching. Be sure to like, share, subscribe to the video or to our channel. And yeah, thank you all. Thank you, Jeff, for being on, and thank you, Dee and Anthony, for being here with us. And yeah, from us at the CU. From us at the CU, we will see you later.
Bye.
Bye,
everybody.